If you're a high performer who's doing everything right and you're still hitting your goals and finding success and all that, but your week feels slightly out of control and sometimes, the money isn't there, it's a little off budget, whatever the case is, I know what's happening. This is an extremely common issue. It's not your goals, it's not your discipline, it's your math. See, high performers are used to running at 100%, which means naturally they think that they should plan their time, their energy, their money, and put all of that at 100% too. But that's where the big mistake ends up happening. Just because you're giving something 100% doesn't mean you should plan for 100%. You have to create margin in there. And what is margin? Margin is just the difference between your commitments and your capacity. And what ends up happening is because people are used to giving it all they got, they're very disciplined, they're very goal oriented, and they're used to, producing results. They think when they look at their calendar and when they look at their budget that they have to plan everything out to 100%. But that's a huge mistake, and here's why. A great military leader once said that every battle plan is perfect until it meets the enemy. So what does that mean for us in our personal and professional lives? What that means is that we can create this perfect plan and we can plan out all of our time and exactly where all the money's going and think that, okay, this is going to be great. And guess what? It's probably a pretty decent plan. But then reality happens and Tuesday shows up and that thing that you weren't expected ends up costing money that you didn't allocate for. Or all of a sudden the planning meeting that you thought was only going to be an hour had to be 90 minutes. Well, when you don't have margin, what ends up happening is you've already planned for everything at 100%. So now you have to go beyond the 100% in order to account for everything, or you have to end up deleting something that was probably important to your plan in the first place. So that's why it's so important that we have to, especially when it comes to money and when it comes to time, we need to have space for things to just kind of happen and not to go exactly as we planned it. Okay, let's do a little diagnosis here and see if you're something that we would call a zero margin planner. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a visual here. If we were to kind of draw two lines with a gap in between, and one represented money and the other one represented time. If you were to look at this and say, okay, all the plans that I'm making, whether it's your personal life, your professional life that are going in here, are you planning it to 100% of capacity within these two things? Because if you are, that means that there's no room for any error. Everything is going to bounce right in between there. Well, that's what high performers normally do. They go, yes, I'm going to plan this all out exactly as it needs to go. But think about something as simple as driving to work. Do you say it takes me 27 minutes to get to work? Or do you say, yeah, it takes me 25 to 30 minutes to get to work? A lot of times people do that. They give ranges. Why? Because I can say it takes me 27 minutes to get to work in the most ideal of scenarios. But deep down, I know that, well, depending on the time I leave, traffic might be a little worse. Or sometimes, when I'm driving, I get stuck behind this neighbor because we leave at the same time and they take forever to merge into traffic, so that can back me up. If I hit this one light at the right time, like that could stall me a minute or two. Like we inherently know that it's not going to be 27 minutes every single time for something as routine as going to work that you do, 5 times a week, if not more. So that's one of the big things that we have to understand is that we inherently know this, and yet we don't plan for it that way a lot of times whenever we're making big plans. So when you think about how your day is supposed to go, if you're working on a project, if you're planning out your year, whatever the case may be, what is recommended is not zero margin planning in terms of time and money. That looks like back-to-back calendar. Everything's booked up. You have zero buffer. And if one thing runs long, the whole day cascades into an absolute disaster. Zero money planning is the same thing. I have a $10,000 budget for this thing. And guess what? I have it planned out to $10,000. It leaves zero margin for something you didn't know you're going to need, or for something breaking, or for, money just getting lost for some reason. There's a lot of reasons why this stuff happens, costs going up. So ideally, what we want to do when we're planning time is it's kind of like a book. That's how you want your day to kind of look. When you read a book, what do we call it on the sides? We call it margin for a reason. So this space in between here, this is your margin in a book. That's how we want to plan our day. And the struggle for people who are high performers and they love to give everything 100% is they feel that they're wasting money. If it's not planned out, if they don't have it filled and they know exactly what it's going towards, they feel like I'm not giving it my all. And that's just not the truth. This is not about waste. This is about sustainability. Because what's not sustainable is constantly planning to 100%. And then when somebody needs to talk a little bit longer, or a project is taking a little bit longer than it should, or this person, goes over on their meeting. Yeah, it could be 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here, whatever, but that stacks up every single day over the course of long periods of time. And what does that lead to? It leads to burnout. It leads to us, missing on our projections. We have to delete things that were also important, but we just had to cater to this thing that went over. And what really it all comes down to is that if we just planned better and said, hey, I'm not planning for 100%, I'm planning for 80%. And I'm going to leave that 20% there to be flexible. I live in Florida. One of the trees that will survive almost any hurricane, no matter how fast it is not the strong, firm, thick oak that looks totally immovable. It's the palm tree, the really skinny, tall one. Why is that? Because it can bend and it can go with the wind. And that's why it's able to live on the coast and survive some of the harshest winds. Whereas the oak trees, they crack and fall over whenever they're met with really harsh conditions. It's the same thing with us. We have to have flexibility built in. Otherwise, we're going to end up cracking and ultimately tumbling over. So now we have to ask ourselves a question. Why is this so common with high performers? Because ambition and zero margin look identical sometimes. Hey, if I'm going to give it 100%, I might as well plan to 100%. When we look at it that way, that makes sense, doesn't it? But the reality is that reality doesn't work that way. So for high performers who want to get everything done, guess what? It's even more ambitious to plan with margin, because now you're saying, hey, I have 8 hours allotted to this project and $1,000 to put towards it for today. We're going to plan to get this done in 6 hours, and we're going to come in at $900 at budget. That's what we're going to plan for. Now we have an extra 2 hours in case things need to go a little bit longer. And then, we got an extra $100 in case we end up spending a little over. That should actually appeal to us as high performers even more, because it's like, man, we're going to get the same stuff done in a shorter time frame. We're going to come ahead of things. And then guess what? If stuff ends up happening along the way, we're still going to finish on time because we have space. We have margin that has been allowed for whatever's going to happen. Now, how much margin should you plan for anything with your time or your money? It's going to depend, based off of the project you're doing, the time frame that it is. But the general rule of thumb that I like to follow is the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. So if you have 10 hours to do something and 1,000 hours to spend on it, guess what? Plan for 8 hours and plan to spend $800. That's what you should build towards, and then you will have your margin there. It tends to be a pretty good standard working rule. But again, if you've been doing something for a really long time and you know it really well, judge it for yourself. The goal is never to build the perfect plan. The goal is to build a plan that will lead to success once it meets life. And building margin is absolutely essential to doing that. Don't feel like that's lowering your standards. That's not what this is. What it is just being intelligent about how life actually works.